Story 1. I was born deaf, but had my hearing restored. I'm now hearing things I'm not supposed to. I never minded being deaf, and in fact, I preferred it as I got older. I know that I was expected to feel lonely, even isolated, but I love the silence. It allowed me to move through life without distraction. I only had to turn on a Fox News to be glad, and reminded that my genetic predisposition was saving me from a massive headache of all the unnecessary noise in the world. My parents, on the other hand, saw my disability as some sort of personal slight to them, as if God was sticking out a thick middle finger when I was born. Barbara and Louis Cascade, with their perfect upper middle class existence, were not supposed to have a deaf daughter. I was exactly how they wanted me to look, with corn silk blonde hair, porcelain skin, and bright blue eyes. But to them, I was like a beautiful piece of pottery with a large, unsightly crack down the middle. Useless. They tried everything: surgeries, naturopathic doctors, acupuncture, anything that might fix me. When nothing did, they conceded. There was always that lingering feeling of disappointing them, even though I excelled at school, had a great job, and married a dream of a husband named Teddy. I think that is why I agreed to the surgery. I wanted to finally make them happy, give them the daughter they always wanted, a perfect daughter that could hear. It was a restorative experimental procedure that was to be performed by a renowned otolaryngologist named Dr. Wilson Hubbard, who was based near my hometown on the outskirts of Seattle. The doctor was very clear. There was a high probability of failure, and that he was still working on the nuances of the operation. At my parents' insistence and pocketbook, he agreed to take me on as a patient, clearing his schedule. It all happened so fast that Teddy was unable to get off of work, so I was forced to fly out of Boston by myself, greeting my hopeful but anxious parents in Seattle. We went to the hospital where Dr. Hubbard dumbed down the surgery to the most pedestrian of terms. I nodded along, not really taking in anything he was saying. The night before the operation, I lay on my old bed, FaceTiming Teddy. I had become acutely skilled at reading lips over the years. "I love you too," I said, signing with my hands before turning off the lights and drifting to sleep. I was given anesthesia, and when I awoke from the surgery, a nurse was there to help me, calling my parents and the doctor to let me know I was conscious. "How are you feeling, Callie?" said Dr. Hubbard, stroking his white beard. He reminded me of a slimmed-down version of the KFC Colonel Sanders. "I'm okay. There's some pain in my—" I stopped, and Dr. Hubbard gave me an amused smile. I, I can hear my voice," I stammered. "Oh my God." My mom began crying as her and my dad wrapped their arms around me, brimming with joy. "Thank you, Dr. Hubbard. Thank you," Mom said in tears. She sounded like I expected her to, high-pitched and jarring. My dad's voice, on the other hand, was low and smooth, pleasant. We went back to my parents' house, and I called Teddy to let him know that the surgery was, as far as I could tell, a success. "That's amazing," he said, and I was so glad to find his voice melodic. "I'm swamped at work, but I'll try to get out there as soon as I can. Promise." When my parents and I sat down for dinner, I could still feel a bit of pressure in my ears, but overall felt normal. I was talking excitedly about some of my new favorite sounds when I heard something. It was like my mother's voice, except in the faintest of whispers. It's a shame she still has the same voice. "What?" I said, and both my parents looked at me. "Did you just say something about my voice?" My mom's face turned ashen. "No, dear. Nobody said anything about your voice." She gripped her glass of Chardonnay, taking a long sip. I turned my attention towards her and could hear something else. It was a sound that I would later identify as a squeaky wheel, a low ambient noise. almost undetectable. There was something else too, a hushed but warm hum. Bum, 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 a bum, bum, bum. Mashed potatoes. I looked over to my dad, who was heaping another spoonful of potatoes on his plate. I caught his glance and he gave me a small wave. Over the next few days, I came to discover it wasn't just my parents that I could hear, but everyone. That each person carried with them their own individual and unique sound. Most of the time, just a background noise that was so faint I could barely hear it. I would occasionally come across a thought in words, but for the most part, it was just an audible sensation. I spent my days on YouTube listening to as many sounds as I could so that I could identify the noises that I heard from the people around me. Mrs. Tucker, a pleasant woman across the street who was a wonderful cook, had a noise that I could best describe like teeth being sunk into fried chicken. The mailman's sound reminded me of rain falling on stones. Roger, my parents' gardeners, sounded like a deck of cards being shuffled. They weren't all pleasant sounds, though. I ran into an old English teacher of mine from school, Mr. McGrath, a surly man who sounded like a choir of farts, a mixture of small toots and wet thundering rips. I had to suppress myself from laughing, listening to the ricocheting flatulence as we made small talk. A few people had music as their sound, not the simple rhythm of my father, but complex, wonderful arias that left me speechless. I was walking down the street and stopped in front of our neighbor, Leah Silverstein's house, an older woman and Holocaust survivor. I could hear her sound even at a distance, a devastating and hauntingly beautiful music that left me standing still, unable to move as tears fell down my face. My favorite sound, though, belonged to children. I'm not sure why it was, but I found that all children had the same sound, unlike adults. It was a mixture of giggles and laughter, hearty and cheerful. If I went by a playground or a school, I could hear the collective noise of joy and happiness, a magnificent orchestra that made my heart swell every time. I was shopping in the downtown area, marveling at my new reality, a life full of sounds. All I had to do was shift my focus to a person, and I could hear them. Tugboats, wolf howls, rustling leaves, the sound of milk being poured onto Rice Krispies. Snap, crackle, pop. Then I heard something, a vociferous boom that rang throughout my head, paralyzing me. It was like nails against a chalkboard. I could hear a word cutting through, clear and awful, repeating, hurt, hurt, hurt. I held my breath, my mind spinning, as I staggered in the direction the noise was coming from. The closer I became in proximity to it, the more pain I felt, like spikes were being lodged into my temples. Sweat poured down my face, and I felt like I might collapse. I looked up from the ground to find myself standing in front of a dilapidated hotel, the kind that looks like it charges by the hour instead of the day. In front of me was a door marked with the number 3. I called the police, giving them my location, lying and telling them I could hear screaming from inside the room. When they arrived, I stood back, watching as they knocked on the door. An unremarkable older man answered as he opened the door. I could hear another noise, the soft sound of piano being played, and an undeniable word, "Help! There's someone in there," I screamed, unable to contain myself. The police officers pushed through, much to the man's protest. From where I was, I could see her, a young girl bound to the bed in just her underwear, a plastic bag covering her head. I saw the man arrested and the girl, whoever she was, rescued. To my relief, as the bag was removed, the music that was so faint increased in volume. I left before the police could ask me any questions. Although I didn't tell anyone, not even Teddy, about my newfound abilities, I made the decision to confide in Dr. Hubbard after the incident at the motel. I sat in his exceptionally clean white office during my check-in and told him everything. He sat back listening, his owl-like eyes, studying me intently. "Just curious, what's my sound?" he said. "It's like the crunch of fresh snow underneath boots. It's lovely," I said with a smile. This made him chuckle. "The ear is a fascinating thing, and I can only surmise at what you're experiencing, or why for that matter. The procedure is reversible though, Callie. I would be happy to—" He trailed off. I shook my head. "No, there's so many wonderful things about it. I couldn't imagine shutting it off now." It was not long afterwards, though, that I thought differently about the sounds. I was in my parents' kitchen making lunch and chatting with their cleaner, Anita, who sounded like coarse hands being rubbed together when it hit me. It was a sound that took my breath away, children screaming and crying in pain, as if they were being tortured and maimed. I could hear them yelling in anguish. It was excruciating, the noise penetrating and inescapable. It enveloped me, and I could physically feel the sound, like knives tearing away at my flesh. I began to cry. A wave of nausea crippled me, and I sunk to the floor. In front of me, I saw the front door begin to open. Teddy's beaming smile came into view. "Surprise!" he called into the house. There was a look of concern. As he saw me braced on the floor, he came over. "Callie, are you okay? What's wrong?" I looked at him in horror, the children's cries echoing in my head, even louder now. My beloved Teddy, my husband, and bearer of the worst sound in the world. Story 2, someone is sending me DVDs of my childhood home movies. They've added something to the end. The first DVD arrived in my mailbox on Thursday, April 11, 2013. I remember because it had been rainy, one of those gross, squishy spring days where your shoes stick in the mud that seems to be everywhere. My mailbox had leaked, making most of the mail inside soggy and damp, but not the slim, clear, plastic DVD case stuck between weekly penny savers and credit card offers. It wasn't in an envelope. It didn't have a postmark or a stamp or even an address. It must have just been left there. In bold Sharpie black letters, the disc read, "Ballet Recital, 1992. My first thought, naive as it was that Mom had probably dropped it off. Like maybe she'd been converting some old home movies and wanted to surprise me. Seems so stupid now. I should have just thrown it away. Instead, I dumped the rest of the wet mail into the trash and slipped the burnt DVD into my MacBook. It was Thursday, April 11th, 2013, that everything changed. The footage started normal enough. Living up to the title written so neatly on the disc, I found myself watching a tiny version of me, little Amanda Schneider in ballet flats and a puffy pink tutu, twirling aimlessly around a stage with other 6-year-olds who twirled with the same childish aimlessness. Those white lines that used to come up on VHS videos with bad tracking crept in and out of the recital. They brought back a strange sense of nostalgia. I was just picking up my phone to call Mom and thank her for my gift when the footage suddenly cut out. In a dark room, lit ruthlessly in the face by some off-screen source, sat a woman. She was wearing a ballet outfit, tutu and all, not unlike the one I wore in my recital video. On top of her head was a mussed ballerina bun, sadly askew. Her cheeks were covered in almost equal measure with third-degree burn scars and streaky smudged mascara. Over her mouth was a thick strip of duct tape. Had it not been for the burn scars, I might not have recognized her, but I did. That and her eye, the one that was squinched almost closed, swollen from the burns. I could never have forgotten that eye. It was my childhood best friend, Gretchen, Gretchen Hartman. "Oh my God," I said to no one in particular. It had been years, probably 9 or 10 since I'd seen her. Probably nearly that long since she'd even crossed my mind. Tears leaked from Gretchen's eyes, the normal one and the disfigured one. She kept shaking her head, looking off camera at someone or something. Have you ever seen something so unbelievable, so unexpected, that it doesn't seem real? One time when I was a kid, I saw a terrible accident. It happened right in front of me and I couldn't look away, but I couldn't do anything to help either. This felt like that. Gretchen let out a wail from behind the duct tape and squeezed her eyes closed. She shook her head harder. Her shoulders strained helplessly against what could only be very tight bonds. I heard my heartbeat pounding thick in my ears. Suddenly, Gretchen's eyes popped wide open, like maybe she was in pain or something. And the footage cut off her following scream, going immediately to black. I sat there for a long moment, dumbstruck. Then across the screen in tall white letters, standing out against the black like bones and tar, "Involve the police and she dies." These hovered before me, then "Wait for more," and then it was over. I stared at my MacBook. The video player stared back. With shaking fingers, I clicked the play icon. I watched as the footage started over again. Me in my innocent little ballerina outfit, Gretchen's burnt skin, the bun askew on her head, the duct tape over her mouth, the squinted, squashed eye, the warning at the end, "Involve the police and she dies." Of everything I'd seen in the video, that was the easiest to understand. My hand hovered over my iPhone anyway. How would whoever had sent the DVD know whether I had called the police? Well, that was simple enough. They knew where I lived. That was obvious. The DVD hadn't been mailed to my house. It had been placed in the mailbox like a horrible little present. Why me? And why, of all people, Gretchen? While I sat there, MacBook glowing in the low light of that dreary April day, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in a long time, thinking about my childhood. There's a good reason for that, too. I avoided thinking about my childhood because we tend to avoid things with teeth, and my memories of growing up had just that: dark spots, black places, and gleaming in those shadows, long, sharp teeth. I met Gretchen when I was 6 years old, about 3 months after the ballet recital on the DVD. Dad had lingered in the hospital, choking on his own blood for as long as I could remember. When he died, we couldn't afford payments on the nice little brick house in suburbia, so a few days after the funeral, Mom packed us up and off we went. I was pretty young, but I remember thinking, why so fast? Why now? Why did I have to lose my dad and my house, my school, my friends, all in the same summer? When you're an adult, you can put some perspective on the situation. Mom was always a proud lady. Our funds had been drained with Dad in ICU for so long, and she couldn't bear a foreclosure on top of everything else. I still think it was a shitty thing to do to a kid. We took what Mom hadn't sold and moved into low-income housing in what I'd heard called the bad part of town, all ominous and worthy of capital letters. We pulled up in front of it, a squat little yellow tinder box half the size of our pretty gingerbread house, with the sturdy columns and stained glass windows. Two square windows on either side of a door that seemed to me like eyes and a mouth calling out, "Come inside, Amanda. I'm hungry. I want to eat you up just like cancer ate your daddy up from the inside." The first day we were there, I couldn't stop crying. I tried, I really did, but I couldn't, and Mom yelled that I was useless, but I knew she was just upset about Dad, so I went to sit on the crumbly cement step out front to let her unpack the kitchen in peace. I rubbed at my eyes with the heels of my hands until I saw stars exploding in the darkness. It hurt, but also felt kinda good too, so I kept doing it even though Mom had said before that I shouldn't. My mommy says that's bad for your eyes, said someone behind the exploding stars. I stopped and looked up to see another girl, a girl my age with kinky red hair and thick Coke bottle glasses. They had pink rims, and I remember the color looked weird with her hair. Why? I sniffled, trying not to let on that I was crying, even though it was obvious I had been. Is that what happened to you? The girl shrugged but said, no. I woke up one day and couldn't see Tom and Jerry very good on the TV, and my mommy took me to the doctor, and they said I got near sights. Oh, I said, assuming that meant she had almost sight and accepting it as fact. Why you crying? Gretchen squinted at me. She didn't have the burn scars yet or the scrunched up eye, just lots and lots of freckles. I didn't really want to tell this red-haired girl with glasses that my life as I knew it was over, but for some reason I found myself saying, my dad died, I explained, wiping tears from my cheeks. I'd finally stopped crying. He was sick for a long time, and now we're poor, so we live here. An adult might have taken that as an insult, but Gretchen's face lit up. I'm poor too, she exclaimed brightly, clasping her hands together. Most everyone round here is, but not a lot of kids. Especially not girls. We could be friends. I sniffed again, looked her over with the frank, unbiased consideration only children are afforded. Seemed to come up with one answer. All my friends were gone. Mom was mad all the time. And even though Gretchen wasn't much, this one would have to do. Okay, I said, with not as much enthusiasm as I think she'd expected. Her face clouded over a little, eyes growing dark behind those thick glasses. Eager to get her good mood back. I'd had enough bad moods with Mom, as it were. I added, I have a Lisa Frank friendship bracelet kit inside. You want me to go get it? Her smile returned, brighter than ever. Yep, 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 Gretchen chirped, reminding me of Ducky from The Land Before Time. Ducky's my favorite, so suddenly I felt a little better. Better than I had in a while. Can I call you Ducky? I asked shyly, unsure if this was reaching too far for a new friend. Gretchen flushed pink under her freckles, matching the rims of her glasses, and gave me a hard, brief hug. I never had a nickname before, she said. Yep, 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 I'll be your Ducky. Let's make bracelets. And we did. I heeded the DVD's warning and didn't call the cops. After a night of sleep, I still wasn't sure what I was supposed to do. Gretchen and I hadn't spoken in years. I wasn't even friends with her on Facebook and didn't have her family's contact information. I considered calling Mom, but I didn't really want her involved in this either. I was holding my iPhone in one sweaty palm, going over my options the way my grandmother used to worry over a small smooth stone with an imprint for her thumb, when it occurred to me, wait for more. I ran out to the mailbox even though I knew the chain-smoking mailman wouldn't be around for another few hours, and was less than surprised to see another slim, clear plastic case resting inside. Docile yet dangerous, like a coiled cobra with poison fangs. I pulled it out and cringed when I read what was printed on it, the same blocky permanent marker print. Softball game 1995, shit. This was only going to get worse. Story 3. My daughter wrote to Satan on her letter to Santa by mistake. Someone answered. Last year on the 1st of December, we sat down with our 5-year-old daughter, Katie, to help her compose her letter to Santa. This annual tradition was much beloved in my own childhood, and we had begun doing it with Katie 2 years ago when she was 4. That year, she gleefully dictated a list of toys and clothes and fictional creatures she wanted. Last year, having started kindergarten, Katie insisted on composing the letter herself. Such a smart little girl. Anyways, I tell whoever reads this, the story, as both a coping mechanism and a cautionary tale. I don't think we have seen the last of this nightmare, And as Christmas approaches once again, I grow ever more nervous. After writing the list of material goods she desired, she scrawled to Santa on the front of the envelope. Or at least she tried to. What she actually wrote was, to Satan. I thought it was hilarious while my wife, Sam, was torn between amusement and horror. I talked her into letting me send it as is, just to make the mailman laugh. I also posted it on Reddit and got a tidy sum of karma for it on Or Kids Are Fucking Stupid. I deleted the post, so please don't look for it. Anyways, off it went, out of sight, out of mind. And then an answer came. December 4th, oddly soon for a letter to be received in reply to another given it takes about 72 hours each way. But that's entirely beside the point. The brief interval between sending the letter and the reply is the least weird thing about all this. The answer arrived, addressed to Katie and bearing a postmark from the North Pole. At first, I thought it was going to be some cutesy form letter sent out by the post office to all Santa letter senders. I sat Katie down on my lap and we opened it together. I began to read. Dear Katie, I have received your letter. I wish to assure you my elves are hard at work making all the things on your list. They are working especially hard on the unicorn bedspread you asked for. It is here that I paused a moment. Her name? Specific items from her list? If this was a form letter, someone at the post office went to a great deal of effort to include specific details regarding each recipient. It struck me as unlikely. It was handwritten too, or appeared to be. Upon closer inspection, I concluded it definitely was. It wasn't a cursive type font, but an actual handwritten letter. I decided perhaps it was a relative or a friend that my wife brought in as a little holiday merriment. I didn't recognize the handwriting. I continued reading, intrigued. However, I am sad to say that you are presently on my naughty list. Not to worry, you still have time to get onto the nice list, and all your gifts are still being made. But if you fail to move over to the nice list, your gifts will be given to other children instead. I stopped reading here as Katie had grown quite anxious. Why am I on the naughty list? I've been good, haven't I? She asked, a tear starting to form in her beautiful green eyes. I kissed her on the cheek. Of course you have, sweetie. You've been very good. I am sure Santa just made a mistake. This wasn't right. Nobody I knew would be this cruel to a child. It wasn't a scared straight type of gambit either. Katie had almost no behavior issues. She really was an angel. Honey, do you know of anyone who'd send us a prank letter from Santa? We got a weird one here, and now Katie is upset. It knows what's on her Christmas list, I say, so she could hear from the other room. No, I can't think of anyone who would do that. Maybe one of her cousins. But how would they know what's on her list? Sam asked, stepping into the room and picking up Katie, who was still upset. With Katie safely removed from further trauma, I set to finishing the letter with concern, intending to get to the bottom of this mean joke. Remember, Katie, I see you when you're sleeping. I know when you're awake. I know if you've been bad or good. And you have been a very bad little girl, haven't you? I know all about what you did to your baby brother. Nearly drowning him in the bathtub like that was very naughty. You're lucky your mom saved him, or else you'd have been on the naughty list for life. Here, once again, I stopped reading. My heart was pounding and I tasted bile. My hands began to shake. My eyes darted around the room nervously. William. Her 4-month-old baby brother had nearly drowned about a month prior to this. Somehow he managed to slip out of his bathtub harness during a 30-second period of unsupervision. Sam felt awful, beat herself up about it for weeks. The bathtub harness was meant to keep the baby upright so that the parent could turn their backs for short moments without fear of drowning. We had assumed it was a freak accident that he managed to get out of the harness, or perhaps one of the straps wasn't snapped properly. Whoever had sent this letter seemed to think it was Katie that had done it. Unthinkable. She loved her baby brother. She wouldn't be capable of such premeditated malice. But how would they know? We hadn't told another living soul. We chose to keep the incident quiet because no harm had been done, and it was a painful memory for Sam. Angry now as well as frightened, I continued on. There is only one way to make right such a serious act of naughtiness. Next time you're in the bath, you must try to drown yourself. If your mommy or daddy save you, you will have learned your lesson. If you die, you'll be moved on to my nice list and go to heaven, where your gifts will be waiting for you, hoping you make the right choice. Santa. Upon finishing the demonic letter, I rushed to the kitchen sink and vomited. I collapsed to my knees and started to sob. The letter was clenched tight in my fist, partially crumpled. Sam rushed to my aid, sans child. Sweetie, what happened? Are you all right? Take this thing, burn it, but don't read it. Don't ever read it, I said, holding out the letter in a shaking hand. She took the letter with apprehension. She helped me to my feet. What happened? Are we in danger? She asked. I don't know. Next time Katie takes a bath, do not let her out of your sight. She blinked. She looked down at the letter, but I snatched it back. Do not read it, I repeated. In an act of impulse, I crumbled it into a ball, stuffed it down the drain, and turned on the garbage disposal. Honey, what was in that letter? She demanded. Evil. Somehow they know about what happened with William in the bath. I answered plainly, unable to give voice to those dreadful words that followed. She impatiently turned the disposal off. I'm going to take the kids to my mom's house. Whoever sent that knows where we live. I nodded. Go. I will remain here in case they come back. My guess is they stole her letter out of our mailbox and then wrote that awful reply. How they know about the bath incident is beyond me. Gently ask Katie if she's told anyone, and try to think of anyone you may have told, even anonymously. And above all, do not let Katie be alone in the bathtub for any amount of time. If they know so much, we can't be certain they haven't contacted Katie some other way, or will do so soon, I said. What's so important about watching her in the bath? She's been bathing mostly on her own for a few months, unless you think she's gonna... He face blanched. She clutched the sink rim for support, breathing heavily. If you get any more letters, don't read them. Call me, I said. 20 minutes later, the kiddos were seated in the car, a change of clothes packed, stroller and diaper bag loaded, and about to leave. Daddy, am I in trouble? Katie asked from her booster seat. William was next to her in his car seat. I was leaning through the open passenger door to give her a kiss. No, sweetie, not at all. You're my little angel, and I love you very much. I kissed her on the cheek and closed the door. I watched as Sam drove them away. I paced around the house, thinking, agitated. I contemplated the police, but the evidence was in tatters and covered in grimy water and vomit. Besides, no threats had actually been made, only accusations and suggestion. I wandered aimlessly into Katie and William's bedroom, whereupon my heart stopped. Several letter blocks, the kind kids use to build words, were sitting on top of their dresser, out of Katie's reach. Let her die, they said. In a state of panic now, I lurched towards my gun safe. Every shadow was a terror, every sound a nightmare. They were inside our house, or had been very recently. There was no chance Sam would have missed them while she was packing their clothes for the trip. I fumbled with the safe controls until at last I had my gun in hand. A 6-shooter revolver, a .38 snub nose to be specific, an everyday gun for home and personal defense. Who are you? I shouted into the empty house. What do you want? I checked every room and every closet, gun pointed ahead of me. Not a soul was to be found. I calmed somewhat, but by no means was I in a good state. Doorbell camera and alarm records came up negative. No signs of forced entry. I checked these things again and again. Whoever it was had been in and out quietly and quickly and left no trace. It didn't make sense. I spent the day and night watching our mailbox from the upstairs window, watching to see if anyone visited it. Not a soul. I periodically walked the house, gun in hand, checking every door and window and confirming nobody was in the house. Around 9 p.m., Sam called me. The kids are asleep. My folks are worried. They don't really understand what's happening because neither do I. I took the kids here because you were terrified, but now I need the whole and complete truth, she said. She was right. In a monotone voice, I told her exactly what was in the letter. She did not say anything at first. When she spoke, it was in a frightened voice. After a pregnant pause, I never told anyone, not even online anonymously. I asked Katie, but she wouldn't give me a straight answer. She eventually confessed she told a friend, but wouldn't say which friend. You don't think she actually... No, I said emphatically. She wouldn't. Somehow they found out about the bath incident, and they are inventing the fiction that Katie did it to hurt us. For what reason, I don't know. Try to sleep. I know it will be hard, but staying awake all night won't help. I hear your tiredness. Lock the doors, set the alarm, unlock the gun. Then sleep, she said. I will try. Take care of the kids, and I will call you first thing in the morning. Good night. I love you. Good night. I hung up. I did not tell her about the blocks. That would only terrify her. Maybe I should have. Put her on her guard. Whoever did this knew us. They could easily have known where my in-laws lived. And whoever it was a skilled burglar. I called my father-in-law, Donald. In him, I confided that there'd been evidence of danger. He agreed not to tell Sam as she needed to be a mommy that kept the kids calm, and she'd be likely to panic if she knew the full truth. He agreed to keep vigil through the night, for which I was very grateful and thanked him profusely. I didn't sleep. How could I? Someone contacted us with knowledge they shouldn't have, made a dreadful accusation, and suggested my 5-year-old daughter commit suicide. Then they somehow snuck into our house and arranged Katie's letter blocks to say, let her die. I pledged that if anything else like this occurred, I would call the police, even though they would likely call us crazy. The next morning, I got a call at sunrise from Sam. I looked at my buzzing phone, terrified. Something happened. I just knew it. Why else would she be calling this early? With shaking hands, I answered it. Hey, honey, are the kids all right? They're fine, but something has happened. My heart rate quickened. My mouth went dry. I didn't speak, letting my pause demonstrate my terror. There's a present here. A gift. Under the Christmas tree. It wasn't there yesterday, and neither of my folks put it there. We think it was whoever sent the letter. It's addressed to Katie from Santa. Do not open it. Of course not. We will, but not when Katie is present and only when everyone is here. Get here as quick as you can. Someone is stalking us, stalking the whole family. On my way. I must have broken half a dozen traffic laws on the way. When I arrived, I found the family in a predictably agitated state. I kept watch, but somehow the son of a bitch slipped by me. Donald said privately after I had hugged and kissed my wife and kids. He got by me too. Don't blame yourself, I said, patting him on the shoulder. The gift was in gold-colored wrapping paper and topped with a blood-red bow. It was slightly larger than a shoebox and not especially heavy. I inspected the tag. I realized what the others had not at first, that it folded open like a greeting card, held shut by a sticker around the edge. On the front it said, to Katie from Santa. On the inside, the tag had a short handwritten message. How did we miss that? My mother-in-law, Susie, said, peering over my shoulder. Please go and entertain the kids for a moment. I don't want Katie to overhear. I suspect what we are about to read will frighten us all, I replied to her. She nodded and hurried upstairs to the guest room where the kids were. Dear Katie, since our meeting last night went so well, I have given you this gift as reward for agreeing to my instructions. Here I paused. Meeting, he was in our house and spoke to Katie while I was downstairs watching the front door, Donald said. I'm going to be sick, Sam said. Following instructions. What does that mean? My father-in-law asked. I'll tell you later. There's more to the note. Clearing my throat, I carried on. Don't open it until Christmas. And remember, if you die, it will be waiting for you in heaven, just like I promised. There came a scream from upstairs. Susie's shrill and panicked voice. Katie! Katie, no! In a state of supreme terror, I lead the way up the stairs, my wife and father-in-law thundering along behind me. Susie was screaming the entire time, and doing so triggered William to start crying from his crib, creating a cacophony when combined with our booming footsteps and Susie's continued panicked screams. She was in the upstairs bathroom, clutching Katie, who was naked and dripping wet, and limp in her arms. In the future, I would remember the scene as a perverse version of the Pieta, a sobbing woman holding the limp body of her child in a kneeling position. Sam screamed and Donald collapsed to his knees. I crashed into the bathroom and took my daughter into my arms. Her eyes were shut and her lips and face were blue. She was face down in the tub. She can't have been alone for more than 5 minutes. I didn't know she would, Susie wailed, unable to continue. Sam collapsed into a hysterical fit beside her father. I frantically banged on Katie's back, hoping to expel the water from her lungs. She has a pulse, Susie said while I pounded. She had her hand on her limp wrist. Come on, Katie, come on. Breathe, I begged. Tears were falling down my face. Then at last, just when I thought all hope had been lost, she coughed and expelled a great deal of water from her lungs and began to breathe. Oh, thank God! I moaned and clutched her little body tightly, hugging her as I never have before. Daddy, I'm on the nice list again, she said weakly as I held her. Oh, sweetie, why did you do that? Why? Never mind. Let's get you dressed, and then we're going to the hospital. I wrapped a towel around her to give her a little dignity in a bathroom full of people. Honey, Mom, I think Dad is dead, Sam said quietly. What? I asked. I stood with Katie now covered and held securely in my arms and turned my attention to my father-in-law. He was where he collapsed, in the hall outside the bathroom, laying in the same spot he was when he first saw his granddaughter's nearly lifeless body being held in his wife's arms. He's not breathing, she said, holding her father's hand. Susie wailed once more and dove to her husband's side. She and her daughter began frantically trying to rouse him while looking for signs of life at the same time. Donald lay quite still, unresponsive to the two women looking for any sign that he had not shuffled off this mortal coil. No pulse, Susie said. Mom, he's gone, Sam said. I watched as they descended into tears of grief and panic. Katie was awake but quiet throughout all of this. I carried her to the guest bedroom so she wouldn't have to witness this. She had nearly died, and now her grandpa had passed all within moments. I decided it was best to remove her from the situation. I left the two women to their grief and took her into the bedroom where her brother was still crying. I got her dressed and put her to sleep. The hospital could wait. She appeared to be all right, or at the very least no longer in immediate peril. Her pulse was strong and her breathing regular. I calmed William as well and sat on the end of Katie's bed and kept a somber vigil over my children. Hours later, the dust of the morning had settled. The cause had been determined, massive heart attack. That was our assumption, but the authorities confirmed it. The panic had no doubt triggered it. He had a history of heart problems, and his granddaughter nearly drowning had done him in. Katie wouldn't speak to any of us except in one word: evasive replies. I gently tried to probe her on the event, why she had done it, if she had spoken with anyone during the night, but I made no progress. I decided to leave her be. The poor thing was traumatized. As the authorities wheeled Don's body out on a stretcher, I stood with Sam in the living room. We watched the event unfold somberly. Susie was with the kids as she'd been unable to bring herself to watch them moving Don's body. She was determined to correct what she perceived as her mistake in almost allowing Katie to drown, and insisted on taking the first watch in a vigil that was now to be constant and uninterrupted. We had assured her she was not to blame, but there was no convincing her. I noticed ash on the carpet around the hearth and near the adjacent tree. This drew my attention to the fireplace, where I also noticed the grate in the firebox was askew. He came down the chimney. Whoever it was, I said quietly. Sam clutched my arm. Should we open it? She asked with her eyes on the present. Yes, I think we need to play their game for now. We don't know if that gift is dangerous or not. We took it to the kitchen table. I unwrapped it with much apprehension. It was the unicorn bedspread, exactly like the one she had asked for. A comforter with a unicorn embroidered onto the front and depicted amidst a field of stars and planets. It's beautiful, Sam said as I unfolded it and spread it out for us to see. We aren't giving it to Katie. Hopefully she will forget all about it, I said. She nodded. Look. She pointed to the bottom, near one of the unicorn's hooves. I turned the blanket around. Yet another message was embroidered there. One death, one life. Welcome back to the nice list, Katie. I'll see you again next Christmas. It said. That's 11 days away now, and every time I check the mail, my heart beats a little faster. I sincerely hope this chapter is the only chapter in the To Satan saga, but in my heart, I know there is more still to come. Story 4. When I was a kid, everyone I know played a horrible prank on me. This is something I should probably be speaking about with a therapist, I know. I would, or I have been, but that's not really an option anymore. In fact, I couldn't tell you how many times I've told this story to various medical professionals. I'm 30 now, 20 years since it happened. I just want it to stop. I was a pretty average kid, I think. A little weird, but every kid is a little weird. I had an older sister, and we fought like two cats. I had a couple good friends, most of whom lived on my street or one street over, and we would meet after school and play until it was time for dinner. My life was fairly ideal. I played soccer, I think. Honestly, I have a lot of trouble remembering much of my childhood, but I remember that I got a Nintendo DS for my 10th birthday, and we had a big party in the backyard. Practically the whole neighborhood showed up. My birthday was just before school got out for the summer, so the air buzzed with excitement, and the evening was warm and felt more alive than other nights. The grown-ups started a fire in our little fire pit, and they sat around it and drank beer while we ran around. I was allowed to stay up past when I usually went to bed, and the other kids chased fireflies with me and roasted marshmallows until late. I remember going to bed happy, excited for summer, and exhausted. I fell asleep quickly, the peel and stick glow in the dark stars and moons shining on the ceiling above my head. Waking up the day after my birthday, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it. I hadn't had a nightmare. It wasn't that. I had slept better than I could really remember ever sleeping. It was late, I realized. That must be it. My mom usually woke me up around 8 if it wasn't a school day. She said it was a good habit to be in the routine of waking up early and starting your day on the right foot. By the light streaming in from my windows and the slightly muggy heat in the room, I figured it was already 10 a.m. or so. I smiled, sliding out of bed. It must have been one final birthday treat, letting me sleep in. She had let me sleep in the day before too, of course, although on my birthday itself I had wanted to get up as early as possible. "Mom?" I called into the hallway, poking my head out the door. No answer. I frowned. It was Saturday, so my dad was definitely already at work, but my mom wouldn't be. My sister wouldn't be home either. She had left the night before to spend the night at her friend's house. She was 13 now and allowed to have sleepovers, for which I was eternally jealous. I decided she must be out front in the garden. I put on a shirt and left my room. I smelled coffee, but there was none left in the pot. There were dishes in the sink, too, with remnants of eggs stuck to a pan. It wasn't necessarily alarming, but it was strange. Even on days I slept in, there was always breakfast left over for me. I opened the front door, opening my mouth to call out to my mom, but I instantly froze. Halfway up our walkway was the mailman. He was on the ground, sprawled out awkwardly on the cement. Fresh blood pooled beneath him in a gruesome splatter. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't move. His limbs were bent at horrible angles, his face pointed away from me. It almost looked like some omnipotent force, had lifted him into the air and then slammed him back down. The package he must have been delivering lay a few feet away, the cardboard dented and soaked in red. I didn't need any confirmation he was dead. It wasn't a question. I had never seen a dead person before. Sometimes my parents had watched horror movies, but that hardly counted. I backed into the house and closed the door behind me. My mind was racing too fast and my heart felt like it might burst out of my chest. Everything in my body was reeling, so much so that all I could do was move slowly, in a faux sense of calm. "Mom?" I called out again, into the silent house, my voice breaking. "Mom, are you home? Something happened outside. Mom!" No one answered. The house felt way too quiet. All I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. I had to brace myself against the wall as I made my way to my parents' room, because I was almost shaking too hard to hold myself up. "Mom!" I pushed open her bedroom door. It creaked, the sound almost deafening against the silence that blanketed the room. Our old gray cat, Gumbo, weaseled her way through the crack and slipped out into the hallway, brushing against my leg on her way. I saw a lump in the bed. For a moment I thought it was just pillows, but then I realized it couldn't have been. The bed was made, and all the pillows were accounted for, leaning against the headboard. "Mom, are you asleep?" It came out as a whisper, even though it wasn't like I had been trying not to wake her up. I wanted her awake, badly. I think I just somehow already knew. Something was hanging in the air, this heaviness, like the whole world had been blanketed in a thing that was empty and hot and dead. A desert popped into my head, a place that was so far away from everything and completely devoid of anything, devoid of life. When I pulled back the covers, the shock washed over me like an electric zap. Every one of my veins and bones and muscles felt 20 degrees hotter than they should have been. There was blood everywhere. I could barely see any section of the sheets that wasn't soaked in it. It looked like the cherry juice we sometimes made from the tree in our backyard, squashing the berries with our hands and laughing as the sticky syrup trickled down our wrists. Her eyes were open. Her mouth was open too, wide open like she was about to scream. I gagged, stumbling backwards and almost falling down. My legs felt like they wouldn't work anymore. I was in a daze as I stumbled back to the kitchen. The eggs on the pan seemed like they were mocking me now. I knew my parents had told me what to do in an emergency. But all of that was gone from me now. This didn't feel like an emergency. It felt more like a horrible nightmare. I pinched myself on the arm just in case. The neighbors, that was it. I was supposed to call my neighbors. The number was on a sticky note next to the phone. My fingers shook as I dialed the number. They picked up after 3 rings that felt like they took 1 year each. I heard a sort of crackling sound, like someone was moving the phone around. Hello? Hi? I cleared my throat, trying to get rid of the lump firmly lodged at the back of my tongue. This is Jackson from next door. I heard some sort of giggle, a choked one, like they were trying to hold it back, and then some hushed whispering. Hi, Jackson, the voice said. I assumed it was the mother, Mrs. Winston. Is everything all right? Can I help you with something? I, something happened. My mom. Oh, honey, Mrs. Winston said, her tone gentle, but something about it felt deeply off. My stomach twisted. Why don't you head on over here, We'll figure out what's going on together. Okay. I remember hanging up before she said anything else. Something about her voice was unnerving me. Still, I didn't know where else to go. I slipped out the back door so I wouldn't have to walk past the mailman, Gumbo watching me go. I knocked on the neighbor's door. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. I stepped into the flower beds, peering in through the windows. Someone was lying on the couch, their head tilted back like they were staring up at the ceiling. For a moment, that was what I thought was happening, until I saw that their chest was opened up like a patient on a surgery table. All guts and organs and blood, so much blood. It was Mr. Winston, in his sweater vest and brown dad shorts. Dead like the mailman, dead like my mom. Something came over me, and I burst through their front door. It was unlocked, which I hadn't really expected, so I went tumbling into the room, landing on my stomach, my face slamming into the floor. Face to face with Mrs. Wilson, who lay dead in front of the phone. Her eyes were open too. There was a fly on one of them, crawling across the white, pausing every few seconds to rub its hands together. I had started to cry. It was finally hitting me that this was real, not some dream, and I desperately wanted my mom. I scrambled to my feet, nearly throwing up when I realized my face was covered in her blood. I swiped at it with my hands, trying to wipe it away as quickly as possible. Then instinctively I licked my lips. Horrified, I braced myself for the coppery taste of the blood on my tongue. But it never came. It was sweet. I hesitated, trembling incessantly, before cautiously raising one of my red fingers to my lips. Sweet. Memories flooded my mind. Memories of baking with my grandmother, the sweet syrup we would sometimes pour into the mixing bowls. It was fucking corn syrup. I ran to my father's work, which was on the other side of town. By the time I got there, I was close to passing out and drenched in sweat. But it had made it a little easier to get here with the road completely devoid of cars. There were some parked on the side of the road or every now and then in the middle of it, but none of them had people in them. Some of them had blood, thick and red and gooey blood. The nice receptionist that was always at the front desk and always gave me candy when my dad brought me in had her head against the computer. Her hair was matted with red liquid, as if someone had ripped out entire chunks of her scalp. Before I could think too hard about it, I wiped my finger across the side of her head and licked it. It was sweet, too. I felt like my brain was going to break, like I was standing on the edge of something completely incomprehensible. I shook the woman. She flopped like a rag doll. I sobbed, shoving her, and she slumped to the ground, her head knocking against the tiles. Wake up! I screamed at her. I know you're not dead. She didn't move an inch, just stared, unblinking, her mouth hanging half open. I ran into the room my dad usually worked in, scanning it for his workspace. I couldn't remember where it was, just that it was around halfway back and close to the wall. In every cubicle, someone was dead. Sometimes they looked halfway peaceful, as if they'd been caught by surprise, but most of them were eviscerated in one way or another. Entrails hanging out, bones showing, blood sprayed against the walls, even some with faces ripped clean off. It was like something unseeable had swept through the town on a rampage, but all of their blood was made of corn syrup. In a brave moment, I even touched one of the organs, something that looked like a strange deflated balloon, and it jiggled, but more like plastic than a human body part. At one point, I swore I heard a giggle behind me. I whipped around, but no one was there. I found my dad at the water cooler, sitting against the wall, cone paper cup still gripped loosely in his hand. He stared straight ahead, blood leaking from his eyes, nose, and mouth, like he'd exploded from the inside. "Dad," I whispered, grabbing his shoulder. "This isn't funny. Please stop." There was a strange look on his face that I could just barely make out through the red, almost like a smile someone would only make if they were trying very hard not to. I walked back home down the middle of the road, balancing on the yellow lines to have something to focus on, because I was fairly certain if I stopped walking, I wouldn't start again. When I got there, I climbed into bed and I closed my eyes. I didn't know what else to do. Eventually, after what must have been hours and hours of lying there, I drifted off into a restless sleep. I woke up to someone shaking my shoulder. I screamed, scrambling away from them, immediately wide awake and terrified. "Whoa!" My mom backed away, smiling. "Sorry, buddy, I didn't mean to scare you." I was breathing hard. I looked her over, clutching my chest. She was completely fine. She looked it, at least. She stood there in a white blouse and blue jeans, her hair tied up like always, her eyes bright and happy. "What? What day is it?" Her smile faded and she frowned a little. It was then that I noticed the smell of bacon wafting in from the kitchen. "It's Sunday, bud, remember? 2 days after my birthday. So yesterday had been real." "What happened yesterday?" She placed the back of her hand on my forehead, tutting softly. "Did one of those neighborhood kids you play with get you sick, honey? Do you feel okay?" I dropped it because I didn't know what to say. I convinced myself maybe I really was sick. Maybe it had been some kind of feverish hallucination. And I was so relieved to see her, I didn't want to think about any of it anymore. I went to eat breakfast, sitting at the table between my dad and my sister, and everything was normal. But when I left the house later that day, I saw it. On the walkway leading up to our house, there was something pink on the pavement, a faint pink stain, like something sweet and red and sticky had been recently scrubbed away. Like I said, it's been 30 years. I've been feeling like I had almost recovered from that incident. I had asked everyone I knew countless times about that day, but none of them seemed to have any idea what I was talking about. But still, I had almost let it go, and it had never happened again. Not until today. Today, when I walked into my therapist's office, it seemed strangely quiet. There was usually music playing, something soothing and soft, and there were people in the waiting room and at the front desk typing on a keyboard. But today, nothing. No one. Silence. I let myself into Dr. Sheldon's office, perplexed, which is when I found her dead on the carpet, her blood sprayed across all the walls, even dripping from the ceiling. It was crazy, I know that, but I immediately tasted it. Sweet. I rolled her over, and her eyes were open, a strange smile on her face. This time I did something I didn't think to do as a kid. I checked her pulse. "She's alive. I don't know what to do." I can't believe they're doing this to me again. Do they think this is funny? Story 5. Grandmother's Keyboard. I was 12 years old when my grandmother began teaching me to play piano. She was in a band when she younger, and she was extremely good. Although I only got to hear her play once, I never even knew that she played piano for the longest time. I think it reminded her too much of when she was younger, or maybe she just didn't like it like she used to. In truth, I don't know, but I do wish I heard her play more often or had a recording of her music. Whenever she played, I was completely entranced. The beautiful music that woman's fingers could produce was unlike anything I had ever heard before. I remember the feeling of hearing her music, closing my eyes and wanting to fall back into the soothing melody that came from those old keys. I wasn't the happiest kid when I was younger. I wasn't what some may call a problem child, but I had my fair share of issues. My doctor diagnosed me with ADHD, and I always felt down, sad even. Maybe I should have talked to someone about that, the depression that is, but I was already taking medication for something, and I didn't want to add something to that list. I still don't, in fact. I, for the most part, ignore my depression and anxiety. That sounds insane, right? Can you even have anxiety if you can claim that it's something that is able to be ignored? Well, I wouldn't have thought so. Not before that piano. It was the summer and my grandmother was watching over me one night while my mother was at work. I wasn't the type to go outside and play. I was always inside, watching TV or reading. Nothing bothered me more than social interaction. To this day, I hate it. People expect too much out of you. You're expected to give into social norms and act according to other people's standards. So I always opted to stay in, and that day was no different. I was watching some silly show when my grandmother came in from the kitchen. "Ronnie, you're watching TV again, huh?" she said. I didn't speak or even turn to look at her. I just nodded. Through the corner of my eye, I could see her place her hands on her hips. "Well, do you want to come help me in the garden?" Again, no eye contact. I just simply shook my head. She waited for a moment, and I could feel her eyes on me, searching me. Then she simply walked into her bedroom and didn't return. After about 20 minutes, I heard it. Piano keys played in an arranged tune that was hauntingly beautiful. It was sad and somber, but it was also hopeful and innocent. It stirred emotions in me that I wasn't aware I'd had. It was entrancing. My feet picked me up and carried me to my grandmother's bedroom, almost on their own accord. My grandmother sat there on a stool in the corner of the room. She was playing on a keyboard she must have pulled out of storage in the open closet, because I had never seen it before then. Her fingers danced and played among the keys with such speed and grace that it was just as hypnotizing to watch her play as it was to listen. It is hard to tell how much time passed while I sat on the bed listening to my grandmother play. If I had to guess, it was only a couple of minutes. But as the music filled my eardrums and wrapped me in its embrace, I became lost in it. Time didn't have meaning then, nor did I or the room I was sitting in. The only thing that existed was Grandma and her piano. Something was calling out to me from the arrangement of notes. A meaning, a message. A message that I almost very nearly understood. Then all at once it stopped. The magic spell that the music had cast over me was over, and I opened my eyes. I didn't even realize they were closed. My grandmother sat turned in her seat smiling at me. "Did you like it?" she asked. "It was beautiful." She nodded to the chair she kept at her writing desk and said, "Good. I'm going to teach you how to play. You need an outlet. I think you're a lot like me, Ronnie. When I was a girl, I didn't like to talk to friends or play outside. Your great-grandmother found that frustrating. She hated that I didn't like to talk. But you know what I figured out?" I stood up and moved the chair by the writing desk and place it beside my grandmother's stool and took a seat. "What's that?" I asked. She leaned in real close and said, "There are many different ways of speaking," then began to play. So that's how it started. For hours and hours, my grandmother sat at that keyboard. That first day, she taught me the keys, and the second day, and then the next. 2 weeks went by, and I visited my grandmother every single day, eager to learn more. It took the entirety of that 2 weeks to know every key by heart, though. The house was filled with the intermittent tones of notes as I struggled to get down the basics. Mary Had a Little Lamb was the first tune I ever played. Then I moved on to We Three Kings, which at the time I was quite fond of. I learned to play progressively more difficult music. My grandmother, always the willing and masterful teacher. I started slow, but under her tutelage, I became increasingly more adept at the keys. "Your skill will grow with your soul," my grandmother would say. "Music is written into the very essence of our being. It is every bit alive as you and I are." After 6 months, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata was child's play to me. My skills at the keyboard were rapidly improving, and soon I felt as if there was nothing I couldn't play. I don't mean to sound full of myself. On the contrary, I would be nothing without the lessons I received. All of my talent, great or minuscule, is owed to that wonderful woman. However, as much time as I spent with my grandmother in those days, I never again heard her play that haunting melody. Sure, she played all the famous pieces for the sake of teaching me, but never again did she play her own music. Then one day I realized I would never hear that song again. My grandmother passed away in her sleep at 72 years old. She had a brain tumor, something she knew about but never mentioned anything to any of her family members. My mother said that she was surprised it hadn't affected her memory or brain function near the end of her life. It all of a sudden made sense to me why my grandmother never playing that song again. The tumor had affected her memory. I was heartbroken and devastated. My teacher, my best friend, and my grandmother were all taken from me in the night. What was I going to do? The only person who understood me and really knew how I felt was gone. "There is more than one way of speaking," my grandmother told me, and the service held for her spoke volumes. All sorts of people I had never seen before, or haven't since for that matter, showed up for her funeral. Distant family members from out of state, old friends that Grandma had when she was younger, and believe it or not, even her mailman was there. It still amazes me that my grandmother touched so many people's lives. Everyone I overheard speaking talked about how wonderful of a woman she was, and that she seemed to give life to any room she was in. I couldn't agree more. In my grandmother's will, she left me her piano. I was both not surprised and a little offended when the will was read. Of course, the piano was going to me. I was the one who spent hours and hours speaking through it with melodies. In my mind, it belonged rightfully to me. When I arrived at home the night of the funeral, the first thing I did was set it up in my room and begin to play. I started with some Beethoven, and I moved on to Bach, and then I freestyled a bit. Music poured out from my fingertips and out from the keys. There was an ache in my heart and a burning in my soul. A melody had escaped me, Grandma's melody, but I was determined to catch it. I thought by learning how to play the song, I would understand its meaning, the message within the melody that I nearly had a grasp on. The first bit of music I ever wrote myself came out that night. I got a piece of paper and a pen and began jotting down the music as I played. It was the early hours of the morning before my mother came into my room and asked me to stop playing. I did, but as soon as I awoke, I was right back to that keyboard. Something pushed me forward, egged me on. I was writing and playing like a man possessed. There wouldn't be rest for me until I found that tune that my grandmother played all that time ago. Musical score after musical score was written, but what I was searching for still eluded me. Every time I tried to recall exactly how it went, I drew a blank. There came a time when my pursuit of that tune had to be put on hold. We all have to grow up sometime, and I couldn't expect my mother to keep me housed forever. I didn't go to college. We couldn't afford it. When I was 17, I got a job as a bank teller, and soon after I moved into the second floor of an apartment complex outside of town. The money at the bank wasn't spectacular, but it paid the bills and kept food on the table. But I never stopped working on my music. Being in an apartment meant that I had to do it in the middle of the day if I wanted to play my music loudly, so as not to wake anyone or make them angry, which made it difficult because my job was a 9 to 5. The weekends were unfortunately the only time I ever got to play at full volume. It was a hindrance, but I made do by keeping the music low. The apartment life suited me well. My place was small but cozy. The best part that it was extraordinarily cheap, even for the state of the neighborhood it was in. The only annoyance was my neighbor across the hall. He was a middle-aged balding man with a green sweater that always had grease stains on it and a ratty brown beanie that he always wore on top of his head. He always seemed to catch me while I was coming home from work, too. "I noticed you play piano." The voice came from just behind me as I was putting my key into my door late one evening. I turned, a bit startled to see my neighbor, standing outside his door and wringing his hands together slowly. He was hunched over, and he seemed to be having trouble breathing. With his ratty clothing and pathetic demeanor, I couldn't help but think he looked like some sort of crony for a comic book villain. Yeah, does it disturb you when I play?" I asked. He stood staring at me with large brown eyes. "I like piano," he said, smiling. His voice sounded as greasy as his sweater. Great. Listen, if it ever bothers you, just let me know, okay?" I said, turning around to finish unlocking my door. The guy didn't say another word, and as I slipped into my apartment and closed the door, I looked through the peephole. For a long while, the man simply stood watching my door. After several moments, he opened his own door and went inside. I've made sure that I deadbolt my door every time I come home since then. That was also around the time I started having a vivid and recurring dream. I was back in my grandmother's house, sitting on her bed while she played that melody that I've been craving so badly to hear again. In the dream, I was an outside observer, watching myself and my grandmother. The other me sat on the bed, swaying slightly with his eyes closed. My grandmother's fingers danced on the keys as effortlessly and with as much expert precision as that day when I first witnessed her work at the keyboard. My heart ached as I watched the memory play before my eyes. It was torture seeing it all unfold in front of me, not being able to talk to her or feel her touch once more. I was stuck in the dream state of unmoving. My lips tried to move and call out, but I had no lips in the first place, only eyes to watch it all. But the damning hell of it, the absolute worst part of that terrible dream, is I could not hear what she was playing. Night after night, I endured this awful torment, and night after night, I awoke with tears in my eyes. The days would come and go. I would play and play. I built up quite the collection of personal written works, but none of them sounded like the song my grandmother wrote. Call me a quitter, but I had finally given up on hearing that melody ever again. That dream could haunt me until the day I died, but I had come to terms with never finding out what that beautiful arrangement of notes was. I had decided that I had to stop chasing that childish dream and focus on my own work. I didn't plan on being a bank teller forever after all. For all the things making music has brought me, the thing I'm most grateful for is what it has done to my peace of mind, my depression, my anxiety, None of that seemed to matter as long as I could still play. One Friday evening, while I was arriving home from work late, I came through my front door, dead-bolted it to keep out the strange man across the hall, and went straight to work on my music. Around 9 o'clock, there was a knock on my door. I got up from my seat and looked through the peephole. There was no one there. I unlatched the deadbolt and opened the door and looked right out into the hall. There was no one there either, but when I turned to go back inside, I noticed a small white piece of paper on the ground just in front of the doorway. I bent down and turned it over. "Got you," it read. I heard the door across the hallway creak, and I looked up just long enough to see the baseball bat come down on my head. "Wake up. It's no fun if you aren't awake, you piece of shit." I stirred and the words echoed around in my head, causing pain. My eyes flicked open to the bright kitchen light. I was in my own apartment, lying on my back on my kitchen floor. I couldn't move my hands. They were bound behind me with some rope. And my legs were tied together as well. Duct tape wrapped tightly around my mouth prevented me from calling for help. Struggling as hard as I could against my binds, I found it was no use. They were so tight that they were cutting into my skin. "That ain't gonna help, kid. I've been doing this a long time. I know how to tie a fucking knot." My assailant walked into view. It was certainly my neighbor from across the hall, but his voice was no longer greasy. It was cold and cruel. Gone was his slouched posture and pathetic demeanor. He stood before me now a completely different person than when I first saw him. He stood straight, caressing a large hunting knife with a gutting hook at the end. His eyes, once large and brown, were now small and black and as cold as ice. His breath was steady and calm. He smiled a cruel smile at me, and I tried to move and shake, to somehow break free. In my movement, I heard the sound of plastic, and my hands rubbed against a thin layer of the material underneath me, and I gave up fighting. I turned my head and glanced around only to confirm what I already knew. I didn't know who this man was, or how long he had been staying at this apartment complex, but the plastic that covered my floor and walls told me he wasn't lying when he said he'd been doing this a long time. I knew my time was up. "Oh, come on now, don't be like that," the cruel voice spoke. "I know I said it's no use, but you're breaking my goddamn heart with that look of yours. A little fight is always appreciated. I just can't go and leave any mess behind, you know? That's how you get caught. I've spent a long time learning how not to get caught. This neighborhood is perfect, see, because seedy characters are just the norm, right? So when someone like me comes along and says hi to someone like you don't even think twice, do you? You'll just keep your door locked, watch your peephole, do whatever it takes to avoid the creepy guy. But you know what people never expect from seedy characters? Smarts. I didn't look at him while he spoke. I stared straight up at the ceiling, trying to come to terms with my own death. It's strange, isn't it? Not bothering to try and fight for your life. I knew it was strange even then. I just knew I didn't want to die crying. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction. They just assume it's some weirdo. Serial killers are everyday people, they say. Your friend from work, or the delivery guy, or the repairman. They never say, "Look out for the creepy guy," because that should be common goddamn sense. But you were just grateful you never saw me after that first night. Thankful that I never pestered you again. He was right. When I saw him, I never would have suspected. He was just the creepy guy across the hall. I was grateful he didn't bother me again. So you let your guard down for a moment, but a moment is all it takes. He knelt down beside me and put a hand on my stomach. I winced, trying as hard as I could to keep calm. But victims are few and far between in this neck of the woods. Killing the unfortunate gets rid of the bloodlust for a minute. Sure, but that's easy. and hardly entertaining. No, I wait for your kind, the poor young souls who need a cheap place to stay and have so much left to live for. He lifted up my shirt, placing the tip of the cold steel on my bare skin. I shivered, and not because of the cold. I was scared, and he knew it. He laughed. The great thing about it is when I take all of your crap out of this dump, they're just gonna think you skipped town. And there was a sizzle and a crack as the bulb above us shone brightly and then went out. The pressure of the blade on my stomach released, and I heard the man stand up. God damn it, my luck, eh? Why don't you hold tight for a second, kid? I heard his weight shift on the floor as he turned and walked into the living room, and then he stopped. Who's there? He called out. There was no answer. In the silent dark, I laid there listening intently, wondering what the hell he was talking about. I stilled my breathing and waited. Then I thought I heard something. I could hear the breathing of my attacker somewhere in the dark, but I could also hear something else. Someone else's breath could be heard, low and raspy. Another sound came from the dark, one that I recognized as music. It was quiet, but it was there. A song that I hadn't heard in a very long time. The moment I realized what it was, there was sudden movement. Heavy footsteps ran through the darkness toward my assailant. There was a loud crack, and the man screamed. His cry was followed by the sound of glass shattering, and I could hear him yell as he fell all the way to the pavement outside. I heard someone hollering out beyond the window, and it wasn't long before I could hear police sirens. In the dark of my apartment, I lay on the floor laughing with tears streaming down my face. Not because I finally heard grandmother's melody after all this time, but because I finally knew the message within the notes. It was simple, but it was as powerful as the force that protected me that night. I will protect you. The night I was attacked was about 3 years ago now. When the police arrived, they found me lying on the floor in the kitchen, of course. In the living room, however, they found my keyboard, broke in two pieces in front of the window the killer was thrown out of. After examining the body, it was concluded that blunt force trauma to the back of his head caused him to go careening out of the building and onto the ground below where he broke his neck. I was asked over and over again about who was in my apartment that night because someone had to have attacked him with the keyboard. I simply told them the truth about what I heard that night because I really had nothing else to say. I'm doing well composing sound design for various podcasts and audio dramas. It's actually really neat. I'm glad I finally get to make a living doing what I love. I had to buy a new keyboard, of course, but I kept Grandma's. Both of its pieces are in a shadow box above my bed now. I've never played her melody, though. I don't want to. It was my grandmother's song. It's her message, and hers alone. Besides, I still have that dream. Except now I can hear that melody plain as day in my dreams. Sometimes even as I'm waking up, I swear I can hear the low notes of it off in the distance. No, I've been working on a new piece of music. It isn't perfected yet, but I hope to finish it one day. It's a score that I have simply titled, Thank You.